We're very fortunate to welcome Michael Routa here to talk about his new book, History of Cleveland Playhouse Square, and share a lot of inside stories. Okay. So join me in welcoming him.
Can you pick me out? That group there is the group of people that I've really started me on this whole journey toward writing the book. These are the Playhouse Square tour guides. And they're just wonderful people, marvelous people. And it was the group of tour guides prior to me becoming a tour guide that really had put together a lot of pieces, parts of what's it all about to be at Playhouse Square, behind the theater, what's going on in the theater. Some of them, like Don here, Don and Tom up in the corner there, they not only know about the theaters, but if you could ask them questions about who played when and who starred what and that kind of stuff, they're wonderful people to know and wonderful people to have pick their brains about if you ever get a chance to come into Playhouse Square. A little bit about me, I am a redcoat, still am a redcoat, was a tour guide, and my history before all of that was I was a special education teacher in the city of Elyria for Elyria City Schools. Moved to the dark side and became an administrator in the Elyria City Schools. Retired after 32 years with Elyria City Schools, and also have 17 years with Ashland University teaching in graduate school at Ashland University, everybody's favorite subject, statistics and research. Yeah. But if you left my class, you learned how to gamble. All right. I retired from Ashland University and the teaching of that, and my mind is like still crazy active. So I started volunteering at Playhouse Square, became a tour guide for Playhouse Square. During the summer, last seven summers, I worked for the Cleveland Indians. Next summer, I'm not going to work for the Cleveland Indians anymore. I'm going to work for the Cleveland Guardians next summer to do that. I've also had a little stint working for an ambulance company out in Lorain County. I was a transporter for the ambulance company. And during the pandemic year of 2020, I wanted to become a better tour guide because I know sooner or later we're going to have tour guides. It's going to come back, Playhouse Square is going to open up, and we're going to have tour guides. So I started to pull together pieces, parts of Playhouse Square, research in the history. And I knew 2021 was the 100th anniversary of several of the theaters, the State, the Ohio, the Hanna, and the Allen. I should rephrase that. The Key Bank State, the Mimi, Ohio, the Allen, and the Hanna Theater. And I said, well, we're going to open up again. We're going to have some tours again. I just want to make sure that I really am on my game. I'm on top of my game when I start doing that. So I started doing research, and my research led me to there's only several books that talk about Cleveland Playhouse Square. One of them is the Red Book, traditionally called the Red Book, and that was written by Kathleen Kennedy. And if you've been to Playhouse Square Center, you know Kennedy's, that little theater down outside, just outside of the lobby of the Mimi, Ohio Theater, is Kennedy's. And that theater, that small theater in the basement there, is named after Kathleen Kennedy. She was one of the first two hires for Ray Shepherdson. And if you know anything about Playhouse Square whatsoever, Ray Shepherdson was really the guy that started the saving of those theaters, and Kathleen was one of his first two hires. So Kennedy's is named after her. That was one book. The other book was a book called Playhouse Square, Cleveland's Playhouse Square, but it's mostly pictures. Really didn't fill in the blank of a lot of the history and how the theaters were built and who built them and a lot of that. So I decided that there's a gap in the history of what's going on, at least published history, accessible history to people outside of Playhouse Square. So I started doing research, and I started looking at newspaper articles. Mostly my primary research was the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And I must have went through 1,800 articles, month by month, by week, reading and studying it and pulling things out and whatever. And suddenly I realized that there is a storyline here that I think could be clearly useful for me as a tour guide, but more importantly, useful to other tour guides, and most importantly, useful to people that really like and love Cleveland's Playhouse Square, but don't really know a lot about the background to Cleveland's Playhouse Square. Hence, the book. And I was very, very fortunate. I didn't have to schlep the book all over the place, because after contacting 2 publishers, Arcadia Publishing and the History Press said, you know what, we think we could do this for you. And I know a lot of people write books and they self-publish. I didn't have to go through all of those hoops. They signed me an editor. The editor and I kind of worked together very, very well, all via email to do that. And a lot of the book was already written. He commented that there were very few edits. So as an old special ed teacher and a math teacher, maybe I could put together a pretty good sentence, you know? And suddenly I've got a book that was published in August of this past year. So for me, the most amazing thing about Cleveland's Playhouse Square is the fact that we are so very fortunate to still have these theaters. I talk about it in the book, and if you know anything about Cleveland Playhouse Square, all of the theaters were shut down by 1969. All of them were boarded up except the Hanna. All of them were on the chopping block to be torn down. And Lowell State, the Key Bank State, and the Mimi Ohio Theater, the Ohio Theater, were actually, they had a truck out there to knock them down to make parking lots. Okay? So we are just so fortunate to have saved these wonderful jewels of theaters that are they're just magnificent places. And if you've been there, and most of you have been, you understand how nice they are. And if you've been there this year for the Lion King and/or the Prom, you know that there are new seats in the Key Bank State, and there are new seats in the Palace Theater. All right, so we've continued to invest in these theaters to keep them top notch. Cleveland's Playhouse Square is the second largest collective of theaters under one management group outside of New York's Lincoln Center. Okay, everybody says, well, we got all those theaters on Broadway. Oh, you know, you got the 42nd and the Gold and the Golden and the Globe and so and such and such up and down this. Well, yeah, there are a lot of theaters there on off Broadway and on Broadway, but they're not under one management group. Each of those theaters is managed by somebody different. So there's not under one management company as ours is. So that puts us in that unique position of being second largest. I put this picture in here because this is a picture of the L's Mansion, all right? And we all have heard and read about and know stories about the fact that Euclid Avenue was Millionaire's Row. Truly, Mark Twain called it the most beautiful avenue in the world when he visited it. This was on Euclid Avenue. This is Euclid Avenue, to give you some perspective of what they're talking about as far as when they say mansions and grand houses on Euclid Avenue. This is an example of what the houses look like on Euclid Avenue. This is the L's Mansion. All right, they had all that space between there and Euclid Avenue. Some of them, I don't remember exactly which ones, but some of them, their front door was on Euclid Avenue. Their back door was Lake Erie. They owned all the property between Euclid Avenue and Lake Erie. Because that Chester Avenue didn't exist then, and Superior didn't go all the way through, and Lakeside Avenue and the Shoreway, none of that was there. So when these houses were built, they bought the property, and the property goes all the way to the lake. So you get some sense of what Euclid Avenue was all about. And that also was the draw for the theater builders, because Euclid Avenue was so famous. Why not, when we're going to put a cluster of theaters together, why not put a collection or a cluster of theaters on Euclid Avenue? And these are the guys that built it. Now, the book isn't specifically about a biography of all of them, but I have to mention them, and I do mention them in the book, to give you some sense of how these theaters were built and why these gentlemen came to Cleveland and built the theaters there. And B.F. Keith. B.F. Keith is the grand leader of vaudeville. It was Keith's circuit of vaudeville that really was the most famous vaudeville circuit in the country. All right, and by circuit, it was called the Keith Vaudeville Circuit specifically that way because if you were a performer, you followed the circuit. You started in New York, you went to, or started in Boston, went to New York, went to Philadelphia, went to Pittsburgh, went to Buffalo, went to Cleveland, and then returned via the circuit back again. All right, that's why it was called a circuit. That way, you didn't have to go from Cleveland back to Boston, from Boston back to Cincinnati, from Cincinnati back to New York. You just followed the circuit down along the way. Keith, unfortunately, died before the Keith Palace opened up in Cleveland. He died in 1914. The next gentleman is Edward Albee. Edward Albee was Keith's partner. He was the real business guy behind Keith's enterprises. He was the one that put together the Vaudeville Trust, Big Vaudeville. If you did not sign with Keith Albee, you did not get in the circuit. So it was you were in or you're out as far as Big Vaudeville was concerned, and it was Albee that put that together. This is Marcus Lowe. Marcus Lowe bought or built Lowe's State and was in partnership with Lowe's Ohio, although he did not immediately directly control Lowe's Ohio. Marcus Lowe started out in Nickelodeons. He put together moving pictures that you'd go to Cedar Point upstairs. They used to have that games gallery, you know. They used to have little gaming spots all around cities, and you'd put a nickel in or a penny in, and you'd see like 15 seconds of a movie. And then you'd have to put another penny in to see another 15 seconds of the movie. And it was Marcus Lowe that put a couple of these together in New York City and was making so much money, he decided, well, we should be able to do something bigger than that. And it was Marcus Lowe that in a theater in Cincinnati, it wasn't him directly, but he built the first Lowe's Theater in Cincinnati, where you could come in and see a silent movie, when movies silent photoplay, all right, in there. And he made tremendous amounts of money. He also dabbled, we talk about that in the book a little bit also, dabbled in the fact that, you know, I got to have motion pictures. I've got theaters all over the country. I've got to have motion pictures in order to come in. So he put together MGM. It was under his guidance that MGM movie theaters were put together. The next two characters here are Jay and Jules Allen. Jay and Jules Allen were the builders of the Allen Theater. All right, they grew up in Pennsylvania and moved and started the theater, a whole series of theaters in Canada. And Mary Pickworth was from Toronto, and she was the biggest star in Canada. And Jay and Jules were able to get exclusive rights to her movies. Hence, they built movie palaces all over Canada, Toronto, Montreal, all the big cities, all the little cities, all the way out to Calgary. And they had this huge enterprise of theaters. They're thinking, well, why just make money in Canada? So they decided they were going to make some theaters in Detroit and Cleveland. They crossed the border, and the director, the owner of Paramount Pictures, who Mary Pickworth was a star for, said, I don't want you coming into our theaters anymore. And so when they built the theaters in Cleveland, they had two theaters. They had the Allen Theater, and then on Gordon Square, the Capitol, were that was both Allen theaters. And both built in 1921, opened up in 1921. A lot of people don't recognize or know that the Gordon Theater at Gordon Square, the Capitol Theater there, was also an Allen Theater, was also built in 1921 as well. But the director of Paramount Pictures, Paramount Distributors, said, I'm not going to give you any more movies. So by 1922, the late 22, early 23, the Allen Theater could not have lots and lots of movies in, and it was specifically built. Of all the theaters that were built, the Allen Theater was specifically built to be a movie theater, all right? It's hard for me to picture, and I try to picture 3,200 people going into a downtown theater, sitting in a downtown theater, watching a silent movie. And they dress up to watch a silent movie. The next gentleman was Daniel Rhodes Hanna. Daniel Rhodes Hanna was the son of Mark Hanna, the brains behind William McKinley's presidency and former senator for the state of Ohio. And Daniel decided that he wanted to build a building and build a theater in honor of his father. So hence the Hanna building and the Hanna Theater were built and created and named that way in honor of his father. Talk about this in the book. Mark Hanna at one time was in the theater business. He bought a theater, all right, on a whim. The last picture in the corner is actually Joseph Larange. And Joseph Larange was really the father of Playhouse Square. It was Larange who was a real estate guy, got into theaters with Priscilla Theater on 9th Street, and started being fascinated by theaters. But he thought, you know, Cleveland is such a big town, and Cleveland is such status of a town, they should have their own theater district, much like New York was building. So being a real estate guy, when homes were starting to be demolished and property was starting to open up on Euclid Avenue, he would buy the property. He would or lease the property in order to put together a collection of plots whereby he could put together a set of theaters all together in one spot. Now, on Euclid Avenue, we have the Connor Palace, we have the Key Bank State, we have the Mimi, Ohio, and the Allen Theater. The Hanna Theater, more like a New York theater, it's kind of tucked off on 14th Street, doesn't have the grand lobbies. If you've been to New York and seen a theater and you've been to the Hanna Theater, you know the Hanna Theater reminds you very, very much like New York City theaters. You've got a little short lobby and then you're in the theater. You don't have these large grand lobbies that we have in all three of our major theaters, all four of our major theaters. We just didn't have that. So the Hanna Theater is built more like that, but the Palace Theater, grand lobby, Key Bank State actually has the longest lobby in the world serving one auditorium. You can play football 325 feet from Euclid Avenue to the back of the lobby. All right. The Mimi, Ohio Theater also was the same way. It wasn't the largest, and it was the largest theater lobby that's served a legitimate theater. That was 280 feet. Okay. But it was Larange who put together those pieces of property, and it was Joseph Larange who was vice president of the Lowell's, Ohio Theater Company. And that company actually ran the Ohio Theater as opposed to the State Theater. This was the lobby of the State Theater, Key Bank State now, when it first opened in 1921. If you've been to the theater, it looks very similar. You still got the posts here. Playhouse Square's got a bar here, all right? But this is very, very similar. You still got the staircases going up to the mezzanine and the balcony there. And if you can, the picture's not very good, but a lot of the designs and that you see there in the ceiling are the same designs that you would see now if you walk through that lobby. Next time you're in the State Theater, the Key Bank State Theater, I got to remember to keep saying that correctly. Next time you're in the Key Bank State Theater, if you look on the floor, you'll see these like silver insets or posts or whatever that are like actually part of the terrazzo floor. Those are like here and here and here. Now, I don't know what it was about people in 1921, but those were what they put stanchions in. One way was in, one way was out, just like banks are now. One way was into the teller, one way was out to the teller, all right? But those posts, those little markings, those spaces inside the terrazzo marble were there because they could put those posts in there to guide people in and out to make sure people would do that correctly. So next time you're at the Keybanks Theater and you're in the lobby, look down. You'll see them on the right-hand side of the theater, toward the right-hand side of the theater. This picture is the Ohio Theater, now the Mimi Ohio Theater. That was the lobby when it opened up in 1921. All right? And this picture is the Mimi Ohio lobby after the fire in 1964. They had just remodeled it, and in July of 1964, there was an electrical fire. And the electrical fire totally and completely destroyed this gorgeous and beautiful lobby. This lobby was never restored again until 2016 when Playhouse Square had a capital campaign and refurbished it and rebuilt this lobby to look exactly like it did in 1921. They used pictures. Tom Einhaus, who is the one of the vice presidents of Cleveland Playhouse Square, did a great deal of research to make sure that when they put the new lobby in, it looked exactly like it was in 1921. Now, obviously, the pictures here, and across the front, they were destroyed. This was, you can see what's left of that picture there after the fire. They were totally destroyed, but they were able to get evergreen architects out of New York City to be able to look at the photos of the early paintings, and they repainted them, they reconstructed them from those photos. In fact, the next time you're at the Mimi Ohio, the picture that is above bin 216, I think it's titled The Muse of Music and Poems, is the title of it. There's a woman in the middle of that picture. She's got like a parasol over her, all dressed in a glowing thing, sitting in a seat, and there's this a cherub on one side and cherub on the other side, and somebody else playing a harp or whatever, and she's sitting there kind of enjoying the music and the poetry. They weren't quite sure what she looked like because for whatever reason the pictures weren't perfect that they saw, but they had enough of it. What they did is they hired a model to sit and dress up like that and painted her, and then put her picture into that painting that's above bin 216 at the end of the Mimi Ohio lobby. This is the Allen Theater, the rotunda for the Allen Theater in 1921. It looks very much the same. I mean, it has been restored, and restored twice actually, as a result of work that was done by Playhouse Square. We were fortunate enough that these walnut posts were still there. Next time you're at the Allen Theater to see a performance at Cleveland Playhouse, stand right in the middle and then clap your hands. Great little echo back to you, all right, in that rotunda. There's a really nice bounce back effect as far as that. Anybody know why there are domes in any of the old theaters?
Acoustics?
Pardon?
The acoustics?
Perfect. Because in the 1920s, they did not have microphones. They did not have enhanced audio for folks. And if you've been to the balconies in the Keybank State or the balcony of the Palace Theater, Connor Palace Theater, you're a fair distance away from the stage. Well, they look magnificent, but anytime you see a theater that was built in the 1920s, because they did not have acoustics, they didn't have microphones on, hello, they did not have microphones on them. They had to figure out some way to get sound to get picked up and brought to the back of the balcony. That's what the dome is for. Your voice comes up, it's caught in the front of it, and it's carried across the dome to the back of the theater. All those old theaters have it. The Connor Palace has it, Keybank State has it, Mimi Ohio has it, and you can't see it, but it's still in the Allen Theater. as well. And if you ever go to listen to the Broadway Buzz prior to your Broadway show, it's now held in the Upper Allen. And if you're in the Upper Allen, you can see a bit of that dome in the Upper Allen area where, again, you can hear your voice bounce back at you. The Acoustics was there in the Upper Allen, and the whole Allen Theater were very, very, very good. But that's why they're there. Even the Hanna Theater has a bit of a dome on it, even though it's constructed slightly different, and they've remodeled it significantly from where it was. The Hanna Theater was 2,400 people at one time. I remember going to the Hanna Theater when it was the only place to go to see a Broadway show. And if you were up in the balcony, the balcony was like the old Cleveland Stadium, man. You were up there. Coming down was like, ooh, man, better not have too many bottles of wine coming down. This was the grand hallway of the Palace Theater when it opened up in 1922. Its 100th anniversary is not until next year. All right. These chandeliers, they're still there. They're the same ones in the grand hall of the Palace Theater now as were in 1922. These stone posts, they're still there. They're not in the grand hall, but if you move your way up to the mezzanine, on either side of the mezzanine, as you're walking in toward the mezzanine, you'll see them stuck on either side there. Of course, the marble staircases, they're all still there. Playhouse Square does one of the unique things about Playhouse Square is most theaters and most theater organizations do not make a whole heck of a lot of money on the shows. All right? The production company gets everything but 10 cents on the dollar. So if you buy a $100 ticket, $10 stays in town. The other $90 goes to the production company. All right? But Playhouse Square, they operate in even or in the black, all right, because they own property and because they rent their theaters out. So if you have a daughter or a granddaughter who wants to get married, this is the beautiful spot to have a reception or to come down in a flowing dress and have your pictures taken. They'll rent them out, and you can rent those out. I was at before the pandemic, there was a family that rented out the State Theater, the Key Bank State Theater stage, the Key Bank lobby, the lobby of the Mimi, Ohio, and bin 216 for a wedding. Everybody showed up. I was working the front door for a show in the Palace Theater, and the Conner Palace Theater, and they had them all blocked off, and the VIP kid that was doing the parking for everybody, he had to move people across the street because limousine was coming out, limousine was coming out, limousine was coming out. I was working the theater, and I was the red coat holding the door for you. You know, hey, welcome to the Palace Theater. That was my job that night, and I just saw one person after another in limousines come up and come in. And then when I found out the family rented out the Key Bank lobby, the Key Bank State, the Key Bank Theater stage, they had dinner on the theater stage, the Key Bank, the Mimi, Ohio lobby, it was like, oh, well, they're not broke. But just in case you have a grandkid, maybe, I stuck this in here just to, this is a gentleman here, Steve Kosovar. Every once in a while will post pictures, and he does this really cool thing where he takes an old picture and he transposes it with a current place. All right, so this actually is what Euclid Avenue looks like now, and this is the Playhouse Square sign now, but these were pictures of the Palace and Lowell State Theater back in the early 20s. I put this in here because of the Three Stooges. Mo Howard, a member of the Three Stooges, wrote a book about his life. And in that book, he talks about the fact that Cleveland's Palace Theater was the best, most famous, cleanest, best place to work. And the reason why it was the best place to work was A, it was clean. B, the accoutrements for the vaudeville performers were outstanding. Usually vaudeville performers they'd come into a town, stay a week or 10 days, 2 weeks maybe, and then leave. A lot of vaudeville performers had their families with them. They traveled as a family unit. And they would send their wives and their kids a couple of days beforehand to make sure that the dressing rooms were clean. So that when they would come there, everything would be cleaned up and it'd be fine for them. They didn't have to do that for the Palace Theater, and Mo Howard made comment to that. Now, when you're in the Palace Theater and you're looking at the stage, house right was the accoutrements. House left, stage right, were the dressing rooms. Now, if you ever take a tour, ever have a chance to take a tour at Playhouse Square, we take you backstage depending on what show's on. On house left, there are 7 floors of dressing rooms. All right, 7 floors of dressing rooms. If you're the star or starer, near star, you were on the 1st, 2nd, or 3rd floor. If you were in the chorus line, you were on the 7th floor. All right, but in the Palace Theater, all of the dressing rooms on the first several floors had their own restrooms. They had their own facilities to clean up, which normally you didn't get when you went to a vaudeville theater. House right, they had accoutrements. There was a children's playroom. There was a billiards hall. There was a reading room. There was a place for your dog act to relax. The dogs could run around and relax, all right? All right. All of that was on stage left, house right, in the Conner Palace. Now those rooms, the dressing rooms are still there. The accoutrements are not. Playhouse Square uses them to store lighting and audio equipment. This picture is in 1971 when they were taking down the signs and getting ready to knock the State Theater down. Actually, the crane and the trucks were outside waiting on Euclid Avenue to knock them down to make parking lots. That's how close we came to losing those theaters. This is a picture of the Mimi, Ohio Auditorium after it closed in 1969 and before it was restored in 1982. Why red, I'm not sure. But everything inside of it was painted red. All the seats and chairs were gone. Everything was scavenged in this whole thing, but that's what it looked like. Now, the Mimi, Ohio Theater roof leaked, and there's nothing between the roof and the auditorium, so all the plaster, everything was destroyed. In the Key Bank State, the roof leaked, and there was nothing inside the auditorium to protect the auditorium, so all that had to be restored. The Conner Palace has 18 stories in the Keith Building above it. So when that roof leaked, well, first your dentist got wet, and then your lawyer got wet, and then down the line, trickling down the floors. So the Conner Palace was a little bit more protected. It's like 7 floors inside the auditorium, but it was a little bit more protected because they still had numbers of floors that were up above that the water couldn't get there. Another picture of the Ohio Theater. Just let that sink in. Now, the Ohio Theater, right? And the Ohio Theater was the first of the theaters to be completely restored, and that was restored in 1982, 1983. It was the first one to open up fully restored, and it opened up for Great Lakes Theater, because Great Lakes Theater used to be Great Lakes Summer Theater Festival, used to be on the west side. Great Lakes Theater used to be in Lakewood. That's where Tom Hanks first became involved in the Great Lakes Theater over at Lakewood Auditorium. But they were looking for a new place, and George Voinovich said they wanted to build a place someplace along the lakefront. And George Voinovich said, nope. If you're going to come downtown, you're going to come down to one of these theaters. And it helped really solidify the momentum towards building and restructuring and rebuilding these theaters in Playhouse Square. And this was the first one to be opened up. It opened up for Great Lakes Theater. I think As You Like It was the first show, and then Nicholas Nickleby was the second show. I have an interesting side note about Nicholas Nickleby. I was teaching in Elyria, and my wife and I had tickets, subscribers to Great Lakes, and we wanted to see Nicholas Nickleby. You know, Nicholas Nickleby was a 2-day show. You go day 1, you'd see 4 hours. You go day 2, you'd see 4 hours. All right. It was a wonderful performance, as I remember it to be. Wonderful, wonderful performance. We had a dog. Friday night, we left work, popped in, changed clothes, freshened up, went to the theater. It was Thursday, Friday, whatever, 2 nights in a row. After work, coming back, in, out, off to the show. Well, obviously, our dog didn't like that, because our dog decided they were going to eat my wife's glasses. The dog was telling us, don't you dare go to see Nicholas Nickleby or any 2-hour, 2-day show again. And really a good dog, except for that one day. And so we got the message, don't go see Nicholas Nickleby a second time. This is the new, restored 2016 version of the Mimi, Ohio lobby. And again, if you've been downtown at all, Christmas Carol is playing now in the Mimi, Ohio Theater. You should take a look at it and see what they have done. I was privileged enough to be able to see, and I didn't bring those pictures with me. I may have them, but we'll see how that goes. Of all of this, how many people remember that kind of like Roman villa as you walk through the theaters, all right? That was put on temporarily, and when you walk past that into the Ohio Theater, there was like infinity mirrors and boards, and you went up the steps and into the auditorium. Well, behind that was pieces of plaster and examples of what it used to look like. So from those pictures, each of these pieces of plaster here were put up in the ceiling, all right? Now, when they were put up in the ceiling, they were put up white, like plaster. And then guys got up on scaffolding and they paint the whole thing yellow. And then it was all painted yellow. They put the colors that you see now on it. And then when that was done, they put the detail white around all the scrimshaw, and that was then they put a gloss coat over the whole thing. A lot of effort, a lot of work, but we have the artisans in Cleveland, because of the work that we do at Cleveland's Playhouse Square, to be able to put a lot of that together. This is a picture of the KeyBank State Lobby, and this was Jacques Burrell. And Jacques Burrell was really the turning point. Ray Shepherdson used to work for the city of Cleveland, municipal schools, I should say, Cleveland Municipal Schools, and he fell in love with these theaters. He walked in one day because he was looking for a place to have a teacher's meeting. And he had this teacher's meeting, and he said, he walked into this theaters and he looked at them and he fell in love with the place. He fell in love with the place so much that he quit his job with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Quit. And he says, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to protecting and saving these theaters. And he did exactly that. He moved downtown, and just spent every waking moment trying to make sure that he promoted and put together and did things for this particular theater. And Jacques Burrell was the first step in that effort. Joe Gary, I was talking to Edie, right? Yeah, earlier, and she knows Joe Gary. And Joe Gary is still associated with Cleveland's Playhouse Square. He does the Broadway buzz before the Broadway shows, all right? Here's a secret. You don't have to have tickets to the theater shows, to the Broadway shows, to go up to the Broadway buzz and listen to Joe Gary talk about the shows. You don't have to have them. if you know that he's doing something and talking about that show, and you want to learn something about the show, go out to dinner and then listen to Joe Gary and go home. Because it's free. And Joe Gary loves talking about these shows. I mean, he's just magnificent. I was telling Edie, I didn't know this at the time, but when I went to Cleveland State University, my first 2 degrees are from Cleveland State University. And I was an undergraduate at Cleveland State University when there were like 3 buildings in the whole campus. A lot different now. But Joe Gary was my one of column 2 professors. In order to be liberally educated, you had to take something outside of your major, outside. And I started out as a math major. And so I had to take something else other than math. So I took one of column A, I think it was a philosophy class, and one of column B, and it was a theater class, and it was Joe Gary, and Joe Gary was my instructor when I took it. Now I'm not a theater guy when I was growing up. I liked theater, I liked going to theater. I didn't know a lot about the theater. With time and age and experience, I've learned a lot more. All right. But this is the picture of what happened for Jacques Brel. This is where the stage was, and people came in for dinner. For it, and 522 performances later, it's Cleveland history, and it really started the whole ball of wax going as far as Jacques Brel. Now here's some of the real secrets. This is not a bit of a washed out picture here, but I don't know whether you can see this. These are mirrors, all right? Obviously windows, and this is a practice floor. Behind the State Theater stage, there are practice rooms, and on the upstairs floor, behind the theater for the Key Bank State Theater, are these there's 2 of them, and they have ballet bars and dancers, and they come in when they're practicing their moves and they're working on things, stretching out and limbering up for the show. They would come upstairs to the Key Bank State Theater and they would practice. Great Lakes Theater uses it to do book run-throughs. When they're doing readings for the shows. They're up in those practice rooms, and they do it up there. A Christmas Carol, they bring the kids up there and they practice their lines up there in those. But those are back behind the theater. These are posters that are from many of the theaters that have played Cleveland Playhouse Square. Now, in the Connor Palace Theater, upstairs and down below stage and up above stage on like 2nd or 3rd floors or whatever, these are posted all over the wall. So behind the stage, you can't see them. Behind the stage, along the sides of the stage, up in the 2nd floor, up in the 3rd floor, and in the basement where some of the dressing room areas, there are posters placed for all the different shows. And many of them, I don't know that we can see that here, but many of them have the signatures of the actors and actresses that played in the shows, which is kind of cool. That's not the most famous signature sheet that we have, though, for Cleveland Playhouse Square. The most famous thing that we have is the Hanna Theater curtain. And I talk about that in the book, but the Hanna Theater curtain was at the Hanna Theater for many, many years, and starting in 1949, 1950, as performers would come through, they would sign the back of that curtain. When they remodeled the Hanna, we thought maybe that curtain was lost, but it's not. Cleveland State University has it archived. It's still there. It's like a 90-foot curtain, but all of that history of all those signatures and everything are all on that curtain. And then this area is Backstage for Miss Saigon. Now, the dressing rooms are kind of far away. So how does a person make a quick change? Well, there's the back place of the scenery, and the actors and actresses simply go behind that back part of the scenery, and they've got little wardrobes, spaces. They know which one is theirs. They go in there, change right there, and they come right back out. So that's done right behind the curtain on the other side. This picture here is part of the advance team, and this particular group of people was the advance team for Hamilton. But a lot of road shows will come into town and they'll send advance teams, and the advance team comes into the theater, onto the stage, sets up sounds around the stage to determine where the sound is best, where's the best place to put the sound pieces around the theater, and measure the stage, and that way they can tell the production company when they come in for their electronics and their lights and whatever, they can set it in. And these particular guys were from Hamilton. From here they were going to Minnesota, so they spent a week in Cleveland as the advanced team for Hamilton. They left, Hamilton came in, and then they went to Minnesota and did the same thing in Minnesota for Hamilton to go to the next place. But all theaters had that. And one of the things about Cleveland Playhouse Square is because of our size, because of our theater's size, and because we have this large subscription base, we still have 46,000 Broadway subscribers that come into the Playhouse Square every year. Because of our size, we get to have them for 3 weeks in a row or longer. Most other places, you go in for a Broadway show, they're there 1 week and they're gone. They get to settle in a little bit. I was talking to one of the people from the prom when the prom was here, and they put them up in a hotel. It says, it's kind of nice. I get to know the city a little bit. I get to walk around the city a little bit. I get to see the city a little bit because I'm not unpacking and then repacking and I'm off again. And that really is a benefit to them. But because of that also, when the prom came to Cleveland this last month, it was the first time they performed since Broadway shows were closed. When The Lion King came here in the summer, it was the first time the Lion King road troupe showed up and performed since things closed. And they came to Cleveland first. That's a closer picture of that whole Miss Saigon. You can see the wardrobes there. They come in, sit down, make their quick change, and then go around the corner, and they're back on stage. That's a better picture than the other one. Oh, this is just an update. This was the State Theater, Key Bank State Theater, when they were remodeling it pre-pandemic. All right, they were taking out all the seats, putting new seats. If you remember the marble banister that was across the back, it went all the way across the back. They cut out a section between aisles 3 and 4 so that he could move the sound equipment inside a little bit, because it was always so difficult when the sound equipment was behind that marble banister, and when you'd walk to aisles 5 and 6, you'd have like this little tiny space. So they cut that out, move the sound equipment in a little bit to give patrons a little bit more room to walk back and forth. Wonderful seats, great carpeting now. Those are the chapters. Theater roots, we talk about where theater came from, turn of the century foundations, that's B.F. Keith, Edward Albee. Architects, builders, and buildings, talks about the architects of each of these great theaters. Thomas Lamb was in charge of the Lowell State and Lowell's, Ohio. Rap and Rap were the Connor Palace Theater. I talk about the architects. Opening nights, talk about the great opening nights that took place, how Marcus Loeb brought in movie stars, silent movie stars. Oh, look, they talk. Into Cleveland for it. He brought a whole trainload of them. Music, this is a fascinating chapter. I remember the question I asked earlier about why people would come into a 3,000 seat theater, dress up, go into the theater, sit there and listen to a silent movie? Well, an evening night out was because of this. And Cleveland was fortunate enough to have 3 great orchestra conductors, the Spitlani brothers, Phil, Maurice, and Marcus. Awesome. And they actually, Philip Heeman changed his name to later on. Well, that's a different story. But 2 of the brothers specialized in watching the silent movie first, orchestrating music specifically for that silent movie, and then rehearsing the orchestra for it, and then you'd have opening night and they'd play original music or an original orchestration for that. So, well, why not get dressed up then? Why not to come downtown? Because it really wasn't a silent movie, it was an orchestration of a movie. And Cleveland did that. We had 3 of the best. Theater managers were two guys that were managed. I talk about John Royal from the Connor Palace and Robert McLaughlin from the Ohio Theater. And Robert McLaughlin was, in and of himself, more than just a theater manager. He was a playwright, he was a movie script writer, he was a part owner in a movie company, silent movie company, and we were fortunate to have him as part of the Ohio Theater. He kept the Ohio Theater going during the Depression as long as he could. Changing entertainment options, talk about what happened after the Depression, during the Depression, why, how would these theaters stay open, whatever. And the Ohio Theater, the Mimi Ohio Theater at one time was a casino called the Mayfair Casino. Not casino, give me 7, but rather casino was more like Leo's Casino. Remember Leo's Casino in downtown Cleveland? You'd go there to be entertained by songs and dance people. It was an entertainment place, and hint, hint, the money came from some guys that, would offer you things that you couldn't necessarily refuse. Welcome, Mr. First Nighter talks about the Hanna Theater and Milton Krantz. And Milton Krantz was a Mr. First Nighter. He really was Mr. First Nighter. He knew everybody that came to the Hanna Theater. Tale of Two Anniversaries talk about, look at us, 25 years in. Look at us, 50 years in. 50 years in, all the theaters were closed. Rebirth is the whole story of Ray Shepherdson, Lawrence Wilker, and the whole rebuilding and reconstruction of these particular theaters. Volunteers, I just could not write about volunteers being a redcoat myself. Volunteers started from the very beginning of Cleveland Playhouse Square, volunteering their time and energy to clean up. They would volunteer during Jacques Burrell. They would serve during Jacques Burrell. They'd hold their hats out during Jacques Burrell. They'd spend time and energy. Volunteer tour guides put together a lot of the early parts of the history of these theaters when they were being rebuilt. I had to talk about volunteers as well. And then the last chapter, still yet to come, the future in the next 100 years under Gina Versani. Gina's leaving, by the way. I don't know whether you read that in the paper. They're looking for a new CEO starting in 22 or 23, perhaps. Buy the book, don't buy the book. I'm really not an entrepreneur, but I have a Facebook page called A History of Cleveland's Playhouse Square. That doesn't cost anything to become a follower of A History of Cleveland's Playhouse Square. And every week or 10 days, I put little pieces of story in there that aren't in the book. I could have written a 500-page book. Well, it'd be a lot more expensive than $23. And my publisher wouldn't let me do a 500-page book. It's too thick. I'm not writing the biography of Grant, although I'm almost through that book. It's 989 pages. But if you want to learn and kind of keep up to date what's going on, I have ads. I talk about what goes on during the Depression. I pick out times, like what was Christmas like in 1931? What happened prior? What was playing in the theater just prior to the Palace Theater opening up in September of 1922? Little ads and stuff like that, parts that were just way too detailed, too much that aren't in the book. I put those and I post them up there. All right. I took that picture, by the way. That was during the 2020. But I waited on Euclid Avenue. Waited on Euclid Avenue for those two signs to come up, to be there, to take that picture, to say thank you. I'm flattered that you all came out. I really am.